Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 940 for April 10th, 2022. Coming up in a few minutes.
I don't have a preconceived idea of which ratio is going to be the one, so as long as I can find one that works and looks really special, that's really all I'm looking for.
Greg Metz made his reputation as a distiller at MGP, and now with Old Elk, he's adding to that reputation as a blender with his new Master's Blend releases. I'll talk with Greg Metz later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. We'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, and on Behind the Label.
We really try and kind of carry out and ensure we carry out due diligence to make sure that what we are going to procure from a cask perspective is sustainably managed as possible. And that's really kind of front and center on what we do. It's hugely important.
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Dewar's brand ambassador Gabriel Cardarella here. And as the weather starts to finally warm, I wanted to remind everyone of one of the best ways to float in a pool with your favorite whiskey. The Dewar's Highball is simple and refreshing. Anyone can make it. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Cheers.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. At a time when distilleries all over Kentucky are racing to upgrade their visitor experiences, one has decided that enough is enough. Sazerac announced this week on Facebook that it will stop offering public tours at the Barton 1792 Distillery in Bardstown at the end of June. The decision follows a review of the impact tours had on production and safety, and the verdict was to focus on making good whiskey. Reservations for tours through June 30th will be honored. Sazerac declined to make anyone available for interviews. Meanwhile, the new Dant Crossing Distillery development in Gethsemane, Kentucky in Nelson County is expanding past the Dant family's Log Still Distillery with a new outdoor concert venue. The 2,000-seat amphitheater opens next month with a concert by country music star Cole Swindell. And the backers of Buckner's Bourbon are investing around $23 million to build a new distillery in Augusta, Kentucky. Construction is expected to begin this summer, with production scheduled to begin in 2024. In Scotland, Tomatin will celebrate its 125th anniversary in June. The distillery now has a special version of its 12-year-old single malt available to mark the occasion. There's also a new To What Matters ad campaign that debuted this week at theaters in the UK. Other new whiskeys coming out. Lux Row is out with the 8th release in its Blood Oath series of one-time-only bourbon releases. Packed number 8 is Master Blender John Rimpey's latest creation. He took 14- and 11-year-old rye-based bourbons and blended them with a 7-year-old bourbon that was finished in Calvados apple brandy casks. It'll be available for around $120 a bottle in the U.S. The backers of Sweeten's Cove Whiskey have released a new bourbon that pokes a bit of fun at the rivalry between Kentucky and Tennessee whiskeys. Tennessee is a bourbon blended from whiskeys distilled in both states. While the regular Sweeten's Cove releases sell for around $200 a bottle, Tennessee will carry a recommended retail price in the $60 range. Compass Box has released a new experimental grain whiskey, and that is its name. Experimental Grain has some peated malted barley whiskey that was distilled on the column still at Loch Lomond Distillery, and it also uses some more traditionally made grain whiskeys in the blend. Around 6,100 bottles will be available worldwide, with a recommended U.S. retail price of $150 each. It's not available quite yet, but Ardbeg has given us a sneak peek at this year's Ardbeg Day release. Ardcore is described as palate puncturing, with an emphasis on the punk in puncturing. The committee release will be available starting May 1st, with the regular version going on sale June 1st. Ardbeg Day is set for June 4th to wrap up the Isla Festival of Malt and Music, with in-person events at the Distillery for the first time since 2019. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and on our social media feeds. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Had a great time learning to pair whiskey and gourmet chocolate the other night with Rachel McCormick on our Happy Hour live webcast. If you missed it, the on-demand replay is available right now on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. Catch our live webcasts every Friday night at 5 p.m. New York time on our YouTube channel, the WhiskyCast Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events, brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. If you're a Scotch Malt Whiskey Society member, there are still a few seats available for this week's tastings with Charles McLean in 5 cities around the U.S. Also, this week's Taipei Whiskey Club Loch Lomond night has been postponed until June 1st. But on May 4th, the club will host a special screening of the Water of Life film, complete with a Bruichladdich tasting. Between now and then, McTeers has its next auction of rare whiskeys this Friday, April 15th. Fred Minnick's next blind bourbon tasting is this Saturday in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Bourbon's Bistro in Louisville hosts a Jefferson's Ocean Rye release dinner on the 20th, and I'm scheduled to be in Las Vegas for the Nth, April 22nd and 23rd. Tickets are still available for Whiskey and Barrel Night in Washington, D.C., April 28th. And finally, the Spirit of Speyside Festival runs from April 27th through May 2nd in Scotland. Remember, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, and you may have to show proof of vaccination or a recent negative COVID test in order to attend. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, makers of the Virginia Rye Whiskey. You'll find their Roundstone Rye at fine whiskey shops in 26 U.S. states, 3 continents, and online. Visit the new buyvirginiarye.com site for more details, and please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
So, in Spain, they call Redbreast Petit Roco. It's me, but a touch more exotic. Kind of like a Redbreast PX edition. Finished in Pedro Jimenez casks, adding a velvety and decadent dimension. You know, I won't lie. A climate like this makes me wish I was a migratory bird.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. Greg Metz is in his second career after retiring as Master Distiller at MGP several years ago, but that second career looks a lot like his first, just on a smaller scale. He joined the young team at Old Elk Distillery in Colorado after developing the Old Elk mashbills while at MGP, and he's now added blending to his portfolio. He's launched 2 new blends using his existing whiskies, and we spent some time on a Zoom call this week. How do you top the Infinity blend that you came out with early this year?
Well, actually, we have a double wheat hitting the shelves really as we speak. And then following right behind that, I've got a 4-grain blend coming out. So what makes it really pretty cool is that the Old Elk mashbills, being they're unique and custom and unlike anything else on the shelf. The wheat bourbon, the wheat whiskey, and the Old Elk bourbon actually gives me the latitude of really creating a mash bill within a mash bill, if you will. You know, for instance, with the double wheat, it's like I said, hitting the shelves as we speak, I was able to blend the Old Elk Wheat Bourbon Mash Bill along with the Old Elk Wheat Whiskey Mash Bill, and produce a blend that composite-wise is about 71.5% wheat, about 3.5% malt, and about 25% corn. So it really, when I married those two mash bills up together, it really made for a really nice, wonderful blend. And they're going to be limited release, Master Series blends, if you will. They're not really, I don't think, intended to compete with our core products, but certainly brand extensions that gives our consumers some new things to look forward to on a limited basis. And then the 4-grain blend is actually a blend of Old Elk bourbon and Old Elk wheat bourbon, and the composite ratios on that one came out about 51% corn, 19% malt, 7.5% rye, and 22.5% wheat. So again, we got to build some really, again, unique blends through our mash bills, and create some new things that we're bringing to the consumer. The proof on the double wheat is 107.1, and the proof on the 4 grains 105.9. So both blends are being brought to market at, I would say, near cast strength. I mean, our core products are offered at 88 proof, 92 proof, and 100 proof. So we chose to do these blends at higher proof just to, bring some new and interesting things to the table on a limited basis.
When you decide to take two of your existing mash bills that were already pretty good whiskeys to begin with and then blend them together, what goes into that decision? Because you did that with both of these. Yeah,
and really we were just looking, I guess, to fill a niche with some of the kind of whiskey entrepreneurs, if you will. 4-grain blends are becoming popular, and double wheat blends are becoming popular. So again, we decided that we would start our Master Series blends, and these were the first two that I brought to market with the mash bills with our core brand mash bills. So it was really a fun project, actually. What I found interesting was that, I made up a series of different ratios of the mash bills for each blend. And, frankly, the ones that I thought were going to be the home run did not wind up being the home run. And it's interesting that things just don't marry up all the time like you think they will. When I put the ratios together, I always put them on my table and evaluate them blind. And you just start going through them, and it's like, I'm not really looking for any really one particular note, but more to look for something that just stands out. And in both cases, really, that's what happened. So, and it didn't wind up being the ratios that I really thought were going to be the one, which was fun and interesting at the same time.
Give me a sense of how often that trial and error produces a result like this, because obviously you come in with a preconceived notion that in this case didn't work out, but there has to be a certain amount of trial and error in there, right?
Well, sure. And, that's partly why I do maybe 6 or 7 different ratios of the blend components that I'm working with for any particular blends. And really, it's just a way of trying to find the ones that marry up best. And I don't really have a target ratio in mind when I'm developing a blend, but by doing multiple ratios, it just lets me look at the whole spectrum, if you will, of how those blending components will marry up and mix together to potentially, produce a really nice blend. And in both cases, it really was, it turned out well in both instances. I probably did, like I said, 6 or 7 ratios each with each blend. And, in both cases, one of the original 7 ratios really produced a really special blend. And it's one of those things that when you go through them blind on the table, in both cases, one stood out as being special, if you will. And when I do that, I'll make notes and then I'll mix them up, and I might come back 3-4 hours later and do the same thing. And again, in both cases, the same one came out being special each time. And then, once I arrived at that, that particular glass, and I would go back and look up, what blend ratio that was. So it's fun. Blending's sort of an art and science in itself, and it's a fun spectrum to play in, actually.
But how do you do a blind tasting when you're working from home? Can it be a truly blind tasting, or do you have somebody else put the samples together for you and mark them so that you don't know what you're doing with them?
Well, I do everything in a traditional whiskey glass, and I just will mark on the bottom where you really can't see it unless you're really trying to look. I'll just mark, with dots 1, 2, 3, 4, or whatever, and then you mix them up blind. And if you would have to look really hard, you would really have to want to cheat, if you will, to look at those markings and then determine what it is you're looking at. So, I'm always very fair. I don't have a preconceived idea of which ratio is going to be the one. So as long as I can find one that works and looks really special, that's really all I'm looking for. I do my level best to do it blind. And then in many, really in all cases now, my wife has actually gotten very good at organoleptic and century, and I use her as a sounding board as well. So I'll go through an evaluation, and then I'll let her do the same thing, and we won't talk until we're both done. And in many, many cases, her and I agree on many of the similar properties that we're looking for. So, and then really I'll take it a step farther than that, and I'll invite friends and family that are really whiskey connoisseurs, and have them evaluate them as well, just as give me some additional reference points and whatnot. So yeah, it's an interesting and fun thing to do.
We did not get a chance to talk when you released the Infinity bottle earlier this year. I alluded to it at the start of the interview, but tell us about that one, because that sounds like a fun project. Yeah,
it was, and really that stemmed really from marketing and sales concept at the very get-go. There's a lot of folks that are really creating their own Infinity blends, sort of, at their homes and whatnot. So our sales and marketing group thought it would be a fun idea to start an ongoing series of Old Elk Infinity blends with the concept of, this year's 2021 blend, a portion of that will be held back, which will go into the 2022 blend. And the 2022 blend will likely be entirely different than the first one we put out here in 2021, but it sort of builds like a perpetual blend, if you will. And that's sort of the concept of an Infinity blend. So what Old Elk and I put together was really a really nice blend this year. And in every blend, we intend to have somewhat of a story behind it. And again, the next year's blend will contain some of this year's blend, and they'll keep rolling forward. But the story on the 2021 blend, Infinity blend, was really about legacy and heritage. So it was the legacy part was somewhat of a tribute to my 44 years in the business to date. And then the heritage part was really a tribute to Kentucky whiskey, married up with Colorado Old Elk bourbon whiskey. So the blend itself is about 60. Well, it's not about. It's 60% 6-year-old Old Elk bourbon, and then I've got 24% 12-year-old Kentucky bourbon in there from a distillery in Kentucky, and then I've got 16% Kentucky bourbon from another distillery that's 11-year-old Kentucky bourbon. So it's really somewhat of a tribute to Kentucky bourbon being married up with a really nice Colorado Old Elk bourbon. And again, it's the story is a tribute to those two styles of whiskeys and my years in the business.
Now, what's the status on your distillery? Are you distilling in Fort Collins yet, or are you still distilling stuff in Indiana with the plans to build in Fort Collins? What's the update?
Well, we do have a small craft distillery that's in Fort Collins, Colorado. We've had that for 6, probably 7 years. So we do. It's a small craft distillery. All the blending, all the bottling is done in Fort Collins, and for the most part, the Old Elk whiskeys that are going to market are really from the product that I laid down for Old Elk 7-8 years ago, really when I was still Master Distiller at MGP. So, Old Elk, I met Old Elk probably going on 9 years ago when we first met. And at that time, they asked me to craft and produce custom mash bills for them, which I did. So we crafted the Old Elk bourbon, crafted Old Elk wheat bourbon and Old Elk wheat whiskey. And then I produced in the neighborhood of probably 13,000 barrels of those 3 particular products. And then we also have inventory of 95% rye mash bill that is not a custom mash bill, but it's the one we made famous in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, over the many years that I spent down there. Really, for the most part right now, we're living off that initial inventory that I crafted and produced. So, I can speak to the quality of every drop of that liquid because I was there to supervise it and, produce it. So that's kind of where we stand. We do have some full scale distillery designs on the table, but currently we're really focusing on building the brand and with hopes of building the distillery once we establish the brand. So we've been in market, I believe it'd be 6 years this November. So we're really, as much as we're growing and as fast as we're growing, we're still relatively new to the market. So once we get all that established, I think the game plan still is to, at some point, build a full-scale distillery out there in Fort Collins.
When will you start working in the whiskey from the craft distillery out there, or have you already started?
Well, there's a portion of that should be coming of age. And, it's those are likely to be small releases, or they could wind up being releases that we use at the Old Elk Reserve, which is our tasting room out there in historic Fort Collins. So that's yet to be determined. But as you say, some of those barrels should be getting close to being ready. I think some of them probably approaching 6 years old at this point. So yeah, that's yet to be determined, but some of those should be getting very close to being ready.
You still having fun with this project?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's frankly, it's going to be my legacy. So I think one of the cool things, well, there's several cool things about Old Elk. As I got to know him when I was still in Lawrenceburg over the 3 or 4 years that I worked with him and produced for him, one thing really became apparent to me that it was a company that was on the ground floor of something special. But what really struck me is the company, with the exception of me, I'm the old goat in the crowd, was really made up of just young, smart, passionate people. And I would say the mean age is probably, I'd say 25 to 45. And again, they're just young, smart, passionate people that are driven to, trying to build a world-class brand and be recognized in the market. So for me, that's been really exciting. I'd spent 38 years of my career in the commercial arena down there in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, and was really never part of marketing, sales, or distribution. Those were all parts that I was never exposed to. And since I've joined Old Elk, I've been really deeply exposed to all that, and it really rounds out my career, if you will. So, full circle, I think I've seen about every aspect there is to see in the industry. Every day it continues to be exciting, and I do want Old Elk to be my legacy, and finish out my career there.
I'm curious. Old Elk is the legacy because you've put your name on it and your reputation behind it. A lot of folks would think of you as being most associated with that 95.5 recipe that comes out of Lawrenceburg, because you sort of perfected that over the years, and that's been the basis for so many good whiskeys. What makes that recipe and that mash bill and the way it's made work so well?
Well, that frankly is always been one of my favorites to produce, and it's because from a technical aspect, it's incredibly difficult to produce and have the quality come out the way we've been able to do it over the years. Rye grain has components in it that barley, malt, and wheat. Well, wheat to some degree has some difficult components in it, but corn and barley are relatively easy to mash and easy to ferment. Rye has they're unfermentable components, but it lends itself to really viscous, really sort of slippery, slimy mash that's difficult to process, and it's difficult to ferment. And it's also really has a propensity to foam. And anytime you have severe foaming going on in your fermentation, it's actually lends itself to quality defects. Part of a bushel of grain, about a third of the bushel of grain, when you ferment it, winds up being alcohol. A third of it winds up being CO2 gas, and the other third winds up cattle feed. But the CO2 gas is heavier than air, so you actually rely on that gas that's being produced by the yeast to blanket the top of your fermenter and isolate it from outside oxygen. So whenever you have oxidation occurring in fermentation, it has a tendency to make the yeast go in directions that you don't want it to go in, and start producing either over amounts of your flavor profile or unwanted flavors in your profile. So anytime you have foaming, severe foaming, you actually start pushing that CO2 cap off, and it starts drawing air into the fermenter, and generally lends itself to overproducing aldehydes and some other unwanted components. So what we learned over many, many years, really under Seagram's umbrella, was the use of enzymes that helps break that viscosity, for one. And we got the double added benefit that not only did it break the viscosity, but it also reduced foaming. So that was two big wins relative to helping control the fermentation. But then we did a rather lengthy project with Brooks grain, and learned that Swedish or European rye wound up being a superior rye to use in that mash bill. And anytime we could acquire either German or Swedish rye, primarily, it always produced distillates that were better than the North American ryes that we had used previously. So a combination of those three things. Cleaning the grain with rye grain is incredibly important. Is one of the other things that we found out. So we actually would rent our own bins so that we could clean them periodically and make sure that we didn't have dust build up in the bins. We would double clean the grain to get as many or all the fines off of it as we could before we used it. And, even the degree of monitoring how each fermenter fermented and the age of the fermenter before we distill it wound up being some critical points. So, overall, that mash bill is just incredibly technical and hard to do. And when it comes out right, like we've been able to do over all the years, it's quite rewarding.
I'll have my tasting notes for the new Old Elk whiskeys soon at the WhiskyCast website. And thanks to Greg Metz for joining us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with one of the week's new arrivals, the 2022 edition of Writer's Tears Cask Strength. It's bottled at 54.6% ABV. The nose is vibrant with touches of fresh fruits, pear drops, honey, vanilla, and a soft touch of oak. The taste has a nice balance of cinnamon candies, honeycomb, dried flowers, and vanilla. The finish is nice and long with a lingering touch of cinnamon, complemented by toffee sweetness. I'm scoring the 2022 Writer's Tears Cask Strength a 93, and full disclosure, Writer's Tears is a sponsor of WhiskyCast. Next up, the debut Arden American Single Malt. This Highlander is bottled at 46.8% ABV. The nose is malty and rich with touches of barley sugar, honey, vanilla, and a hint of butterscotch. The taste has notes of dried flowers, honey, vanilla, and a subtle fruity tartness in the background. The finish is dry and slightly astringent with touches of dried fruits, flowers, and honey. I'm scoring the Arden American Small Batch Single Malt Scotch a 92. I got to taste some of the spring releases from Dramore Group this week, including a 10-year-old cask from Blair Athol Distillery. This one is bottled at 54.7% ABV. The nose is warm and aromatic with toasted butterscotch, vanilla, a good maltiness, and a subtle touch of wood smoke. The taste is thick, oily, and slightly tart, with stone fruits, vanilla, and a hint of rhubarb pie. The finish, nice and long, with lingering hints of peaches and apricots. I'm scoring the Dramore Blair Athol 10-year-old single cask a 92. And let's look at one more from Dramore, a 9-year-old Glenrothes single cask finished in an Amontillado sherry cask and bottled at 57% ABV. The nose has notes of sandalwood, dried flowers, toffee, and a hint of chocolate-covered orange slices. The taste is fruity and tart with a slightly dry mouthfeel and touches of caramel, tree fruits, honey, and vanilla. The finish, long and dry with hints of toffee and sandalwood. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,300 whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at the WhiskyCast website.
While there are several claims to the first highball in the United States, Dewar's is certainly amongst them. The highball trend was born and proliferated in Japan as a more sessionable and alternative approach to enjoying whiskey. Sure, neat or perhaps with a drop of water or two is the best way to enjoy whiskey, but it isn't always the most refreshing. With infinite spins and twists on this relatively simple cocktail, it's important to start with premium ingredients. Our latest innovations like Dewar's 8-year Caribbean rum cask finish or our 8-year Mizunara cask finish are both complex, double-aged whiskeys that will stand up to the chill of ice and effervescence of soda nicely. The base recipe is simple, but the trick is temperature. Fill a chilled Collins glass with ice. Add 2 ounces of your favorite Dewar's over the ice, top with club soda right from the fridge, and lastly, throw in a lemon wedge or peel and serve. More time in the sun, less behind the bar. Curious? Begin with a basic highball recipe, then start experimenting based on your personal taste and flavor preferences. Sky's the limit.
Let's open up the inbox now for Your Voice, presented by Scarabus, Isla Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. Our latest whiskey photo of the week features a shot from below the water tower at Castle and Key, and Ryan Hampton posted this comment on Instagram. We went there last year. It was a highlight of the trip. a big favorite of my non-whiskey drinking wife. Plus, my then 3-year-old almost ruined a wedding proposal taking place in the Key Reservoir. 3-year-olds have a habit of doing stuff like that, as do puppies. Bader the Wonder Dog almost knocked over my camera tripod during the live webcast Friday night, but things like that make a lot of good memories. Our friends at the Morgantown Whiskey Guild in West Virginia posed this question on Twitter as an idea for a possible Behind the Label segment. Whiskey drinkers may add water or ice, especially for high-proof drams. Does cold alone alter the flavor profile at the same ABV? If so, how? And which works better to mellow whiskey, cold or dilution? Is there a general preference? Okay, the cold is what affects the flavor profile by closing up the aromas, and here's a way you can test that for yourself. Take 2 identical glasses of the same whiskey, add an ice cube to one, and a small amount of room temperature bottled water to the second glass, then compare the two side by side. You should find that the glass with the water has more aroma and flavor than the one with the ice cube. My own personal preference is to add a few drops of that room temperature bottled water with an eyedropper, but hey, it's your whiskey. Drink it the way you like it. If you have a question, suggestion, or anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Your Voice is presented by Scarabus, the unique Islay single malt forged by the whiskey-making traditions of 3 generations of the Lang family. Look for it at your local Total Wine & More store in the U.S. and specialist whiskey shops worldwide. Find out more at hunterlang.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the science, history, and people who make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. Saw this tweet the other day from longtime listener Bunkai H., Highland Hill. I absolutely loved the first Middleton Der Gweilach release. I'd be interested in how you would compare this 4th release. Of course, it would vary some from tree to tree within every release, but it seems like they have modified the blending over the years as well as the casks. Well, I try not to compare them between batches because the blend and the ages of the whiskeys do differ slightly from batch to batch, as well as those individual differences between trees. This is one case where each whiskey deserves to stand on its own. Now, Der Gweilach, of course, is Gaelic for Irish oak, and this gives us a chance to connect with Finbar Curran of Irish Distillers. With Kevin O'Gorman taking on the role of Master Distiller, in addition to his Master of Maturation responsibilities, Finbar has taken on a lot of the oversight for maturation at Middleton, and that includes the Der Gweilach range, which was created to highlight the resurgence of Irish oak forests and sustainable forestry.
Really, it's about kind of trying to identify people on the ground who you can kind of rely on and trust. With the likes of Der Gweilach, we have a fantastic forester, Paddy Purser, who we've been working with for many, many years. And he really is kind of, the eyes of the industry. It's a specialist in itself. So to be able to kind of, tap into Paddy's experience is, it's invaluable to us. From a sustainability point of view, he really has helped create our kind of strategy over the last number of years, not just from on Der Gweilach, but everything we do in terms of wood sourcing. We really try and kind of carry out and ensure we carry out due diligence to make sure that what we are going to procure from a cask perspective is sustainably managed as possible. And that's really kind of front and centre on what we do. It's hugely important. And that's where I spend a lot of my time, is on that, sustainable sourcing, to make sure that we carry out that due diligence.
And how do you verify that the stuff is sourced sustainably? Are there kind of certifications that you can use?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of the barrels we get, especially from Europe, because there's good availability of certification practices. So the sustainability that we have is PEFC, which is the Programme of Endorsement for Forestry certification. So that kind of really tells us that every step in the process, from the landowner to the sawmills to the cooperage, is certified. So that meaning that all parties are certified or maybe subcontracted to certified parties. So we know that it's coming from a kind of a controlled source. Do we know that to meet those standards, it has to be done in the right way? Making sure that people get fair wage, making sure that we try and ensure biodiversity in the forest, try and encourage landowners to do it in the right way so that they don't maybe clear fell their lands, that it's, they try and kind of, maintain a kind of a continuous forest or continuous cover of that forest to ensure biodiversity remains. And it's better for a healthier forest. It's the right way to do it. But, from my own perspective, but, landowners are in themselves, I mean, it's their land, they can do what they want with it, But, if you're trying to kind of nurture that forest, future generations or kids, your kids' kids can benefit from it. And it's a lot of times it's just awareness around that, making sure the landowners get that awareness, get that information of how best they can do it.
Thanks to Finbar Curran of Irish Distillers for the explanation. If you have something you'd like to see us look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskeycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers, bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskeycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, cocktail recipes, whiskey photo of the week, and a complete archive of all of our past episodes all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address, comments at whiskeycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
The average college basketball power forward is 6'9", which, according to my rough calculations, is 16.5 times my height. I'll stick to aimlessly pottering around in back gardens.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Classic Scotch cocktails are making a resurgence, and the Dewar's Highball is a great way to brighten up some of your favorite Scotch whiskey. Dewar's, ice, club soda, and a citrus garnish is all you need. Happy sailing. Cheers.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2022, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.